Yo, what is up, guys? It's Cohen back here again today with another video. Let's talk about the Phoenix Suns for a little bit. I've talked about them previously in a couple of videos. My most recent video was about a month ago, talking about if the Phoenix Suns were contenders or not. I think at this point it's very clear that they have to be considered contenders, especially after their major win over the Utah Jazz last night, which is what's really prompting me to make this video. And what I really want to talk about is the rise of the Phoenix Suns. Last year, if you remember, they did not make the playoffs. They ended up going 34 and 39, but they did have that run at the end of the bubble where they went 8-0 in all of the bubble placement games, just barely missing out on the playoffs due to the fact that the Blazers won that last game over the Brooklyn Nets, which was an incredible game. Shout out to the Brooklyn Nets for putting up a big fight, even though it didn't really matter to them. But the Suns fell just short. There was a lot of things that happened that season that ultimately did not play into their favor, and even though they were showing some flashes, the amount of improvement that they have shown across this season wasn't really expected. I've talked about this before, where coming into the season, really wanted to see the Suns succeed. I really like Devin Booker. I really like Chris Paul. I just kind of like the Suns in general. They have a lot of players I'm a fan of. Mikal Bridges is another one. Cameron Johnson. So I wanted to see the Suns succeed, but I wasn't quite sure how quickly they were going to succeed, how quickly they were going to mesh together. And it's very clear that that was very, very fast. I believe before the season, I predicted them around the 8 seed or so, which I thought was fair. I thought that there was also potential to move up all the way up to 5 or 4. I thought that the West was going to be very fluid this year, a bunch of teams that were going to be close. But ultimately, I thought the Suns' youth would end up costing them a little bit, costing them some playoff spots, and ultimately a first-round exit, most likely. However, they already this season have won more games, 2 more games than they won all of last season, and they've still got about 20 to go. So this Phoenix Suns team, needless to say, is really, really good. They're 1.5 games out of first place in the Western Conference. Wins over the Lakers, a win last night over the Jazz, wins over pretty much any team you can think of. This Suns team has been really, really good. And like I said, there were flashes shown last season, but I don't know really, if anything, signaled how quickly their improvement and their rise to the top has been. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that, why I think that has happened, which players are excelling in their roles, how they've kind of shifted that. And I'll get to all that in a second. But I do kind of want to flash back real quick to last season. Devin Booker last season had his best season of his career. He was an all-star for the first time, even though he was a replacement. He was still an all-star. A lot of people argued that he should have been one before the whole replacement thing. Whatever, that's all in the past. But he did end up being an all-star. He had incredible numbers. DeAndre Ayton, their first overall pick a couple seasons ago, played well, although he was suspended for a portion of the season. I believe it was 25 games, and that ended up costing his team, because if he had played more, maybe just one more win gets them into the playoffs eventually. So it's tough to see that suspension happen to one of your top players, and he ultimately could have cost them a playoff spot. So coming into this season, he had something to prove. Additionally, players like Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson showed a lot of potential. Cameron Johnson was a guy that I wasn't super high on, but after last season, and especially this season, I'm a huge fan of his. I love when players prove me wrong. I love when players prove really everyone wrong, and it's so cool to see that. Mikal Bridges showed a lot of flashes last season, but this year, or a lot of flashes this season that kind of were shown last season, but his jump this year has been pretty big. He did have those flashes, though. Now, obviously, from last season to this season, the biggest difference is Chris Paul. Picking up Chris Paul, in my opinion, was one of the best moves in the history of this franchise, and it was a move that I was a huge proponent of the entire offseason. All offseason, I was pitching to different teams. I was like, yo, Sixers, Chris Paul would be incredible on your team. Milwaukee Bucks, he would be incredible on your team. Phoenix Suns, this is actually a team that I had started pushing the idea of a Chris Paul trade onto on my podcast with my brother, which is actually going to be coming to the channel soon, so look out for that. But we talked about this just a few days before the move was made. I was like, Chris Paul should go to the Suns. This would be an incredible move for them. You give Devin Booker someone to learn under and work with, give him another star to pair alongside him. You show Devin Booker that you want to win, and allowing him to stay in Phoenix for a long period of time, because he is your franchise guy. You have to keep him happy. You have to keep him competing. It gives a guy for DeAndre Ayton to receive the ball from. He can kind of learn how to operate better in a pick and roll offense with a very experienced player, obviously, in a Chris Paul, and he brings a winning culture to your team. All of this is stuff that I saw with the Oklahoma City Thunder the season prior. Last season, comes in. This is my Thunder plug of the video. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a guy coming into the Thunder with a ton of potential. Everyone's super high on him, and he goes alongside Chris Paul, and Chris Paul was integral to his development. A lot of stuff that we see this season, where Shai was just barely not an all-star, is a lot of stuff that I can look back to that Chris Paul helped mentor him on last season. His mid-range game has improved, his three-point shooting, his ball handling, his playmaking is way better than it was at the start of last season. Shea's development has really been aided by Chris Paul, and I'm seeing the same effects with Devin Booker. Devin Booker is picking up a lot of little nuances from Chris Paul's game, his mid-range game, some of his like demeanor things, some of his mannerisms on the court in like the mid-range game, especially pick and roll offense, his playmaking, which was good last season, is still good this season. He's picking up a lot of that stuff, and Chris Paul is a great mentor. And as a player himself, he's been great once again. We know Chris Paul is clutch. I don't need to tell you that. He's been consistently clutch this season, and he's really helped foster a winning environment for this team. When you come into a franchise full of guys who haven't really made the playoffs in a while, this Suns team hasn't made the playoffs in a decade. Devin Booker never made the playoffs. DeAndre Ayton never made the playoffs. Mikal Bridges, I almost called him Cameron Bridges, but also Cameron Johnson. Really the only like seasoned playoff guy that plays a lot for them is like a Jay Crowder. So they don't have a lot of it on this team. So you bring in a guy like Chris Paul who helps foster a winning environment for a team that hasn't been to the playoffs in a decade. That's huge because culture goes a long way. If you look at the New York Knicks as well this season as another example of this, prior to the season, they haven't made the playoffs in a very long time, and now it's looking like they might, and it's because they've fostered a winning culture. Tom Thibodeau was a great hire. He's helped foster that culture. Julius Randle has stepped up to become an all-star. They play hard-nosed defense. They fight every night, and when you develop that culture, that goes a long way to bringing in players that you want to acquire in free agency, bring in players through trades and stuff like that. And Chris Paul saw this potential in the Phoenix Suns, and he agreed because he kind of worked with Sam Presti to find a trade destination for him because that's the way Sam Presti operates. They ultimately decided, yes, the Suns are a good destination for Chris Paul. The Suns were like, Chris Paul should come here, and the trade ended up being done for Kelly Oubre, Ricky Rubio, and Jalen Lacroix. Ultimately, a lot of Suns fans were sad about losing the whole Kelly Oubre thing, but Kelly Oubre wasn't part of the Suns team that went 8-0 in the bubble. He was shown to be expendable in that portion of the season, and bringing in a guy like Chris Paul is very well worth it. Kelly Oubre has kind of struggled this season. He still is a good player, but bringing in Chris Paul is worth making the sacrifice. And Chris Paul himself, even outside of being a mentor, like I said, has been great. So, great trade for them, great move, and ultimately that helped to bring in a guy like Jay Crowder, who has played an integral part to this team. It helped to retain Dario Saric, a guy who has been incredible for them as well, playing a lot of backup 5 minutes, which is something you have to really credit Coach Monty Williams for, which I'll talk about him in a little bit. He's done a great job for them. They've just done everything right, and fostering that winning culture goes a long way to bringing in those players like a Jay Crowder, who's been a role player on many very successful teams just last season. The Miami Heat, he was super integral to them, and since he's left, the Heat have really missed his presence. So it shows how much bringing in those championship caliber role players helps, and bringing in a guy like Chris Paul, showing that you're committed to winning, goes a long way to bringing those guys in. Outside of Chris Paul, though, guys have really stepped it up this season. I talked about Mikal Bridges, who has become an incredible two-way player. He does everything on the court. He makes every play that you need to make from a winning guy. Every play he makes contributes to winning basketball. If you watch him on the court, there was not a single play where he doesn't have his hands on it in some way. That's partially due to the fact that he has like go-go gadget arms, like his arms are like 12 feet long, wingspan-wise, but also because he's just a good defender, he's a good scorer, and he really gets his teammates involved and helps them out. He's just a really good player. I would love to have him on the Thunder, but I love watching him on the Suns. DeAndre Ayton, a guy who a lot of people have been kind of disappointed with up to this point in his career. He's not scoring a lot, but he's doing all the little things. He's rebounding. He's improving defensively. He's scoring. He helps Chris Paul out. They run pick and roll action. And Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton have really helped each other unlock their games in different ways, and it's cool to see that Ayton is succeeding, being that number one overall pick that a lot of people expect him to be. I still think he has a ton of potential, and he's showing a lot of that this season. Jay Crowder, I talked about him. He was great on the Heat last season, been great on the Suns again. Cameron Johnson, a guy that a lot of people were disappointed with last season, were kind of confused why he was the Suns pick, has shown why he was the Suns pick. He's been a knockdown three-point shooter, especially to start the season. He's fallen off a little bit since then because it was very hard to maintain the level that he was going at that point in his season, but he's still been good for them, playing on both sides of the ball, just a good all-around player. And then we could talk about Devin Booker himself, who has really stepped it up. He's playing his best basketball. It might not show numbers-wise, but this season, Devin Booker is playing his best basketball, and in my opinion, should be in the MVP conversation and should be an All-NBA caliber guard. I picked Devin Booker to be on the All-NBA team prior to this season because I knew how well he and Chris Paul were going to play together. I knew that Devin Booker and Chris Paul's games would complement each other very well. They've been incredible as a duo. They kind of remind me a lot of the whole Chris Paul, James Harden Rockets team and that duo. I can explain that. I can explain that a little bit because that might seem a little out there to you. But basically, Devin Booker acts as the James Harden. Although he's not as good as James Harden was, obviously Devin Booker isn't quite the MVP. Although I think he should be an MVP candidate. He's a good scorer. He can distribute. He's been clutch. He does all the stuff that you need him to do. He is your star player. Chris Paul is Chris Paul, obviously, if we're talking in terms of comparing to that Rockets team. Great facilitator, improves his teammates, plays good defense, clutch, does what Chris Paul does. DeAndre Ayton is an improved version of Clint Capella on that team. Clint Capella has also been really good on the Hawks this season, been a really good defensive anchor for them, but right now this DeAndre Ayton version is better than the Capella that they had on that version. He grabs rebounds, he's going to block some shots, he's going to score every now and again, he can catch lobs, he can do the little things that you need him to do, run pick and roll, run to the rim if you need him to. He just opens up the game for the guards and the rest of the front court. He is a constant threat that teams need to be aware of. Additionally, they have great role players that knock down threes. Jay Crowder, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, guys I've already talked about. You can kind of flash back to like PJ Tucker, a Trevor Ariza, guys like that in that Rockets team. And so I see a lot of similarities between these two teams in terms of the way that they play, the way that they focus around their two-star guards in the backcourt, and have a ton of great role players and a really solid center to help support those two as they try to be the best two players on this team. So that's kind of how I see them. That's part of why I think that they're being so successful is they kind of have that model of you can have a really good backcourt, but you have to have great role players around them as well as a solid big man to really open up the game for those two players. And I think they're following that model pretty perfectly. Additionally, I do want to talk about Monty Williams for a second, who has done an incredible job this season. Right now, I would give him Coach of the Year. I think Monty Williams should be Coach of the Year. He makes great adjustments. I love his rotations. Every single player knows their role. You'll never see a player do something where you're like, why the hell are they doing that? That's not their job. Because every player knows exactly what they're supposed to do. It leads to winning basketball. They know what they have to do to win, and it feels like he has every player on this team caring about winning. Players on this team don't care about their individual stats, as far as I can see. Players care about winning basketball. They are hungry and they really want this. They want this playoff berth. They want this first seed. They want that championship, and they are going to fight for it every single night. They make it really tough for you on the defensive and offensive side of the ball, locking you up on the defensive end, scoring on you pretty much every possession on the offensive end, just dangerous all over the court. And additionally, he has players who have kind of struggled in previous situations or have struggled to find a role for them. They're excelling in Phoenix. Cameron Payne is a guy that I can talk about who, in Oklahoma City, he'd never really had a role for us. He was never a very consistent presence in our lineups, and eventually he ended up falling out of favor, going to Chicago, where he wasn't very good as well. Here in Phoenix, for most of this season, he has played a good role for them. He's been a solid backup point guard. He facilitates, he can knock down some shots, which is something he struggled with a lot in Oklahoma City, and he's just been good. He's just been a solid player this season, and that's all you can ask from him. He's playing his role. A guy like Dario Saric, whose numbers are down, I would argue might be playing his best basketball of his career in terms of helping his team win, because Saric knows his role, and he plays it perfectly. He is their backup five at a lot of times. When they run a lineup with Dario Saric at the 5 spot, it is super effective because he stretches the floor. He's better than you would think in the playmaking aspect of the ball. He's just good all around. He helps the players. He knows exactly where he's supposed to be, and he knows where he's supposed to get the ball to. Monty Williams does a lot of that. The credit, of course, has to go as well to the players, but the fact that Monty Williams is putting these players in positions to succeed and putting them in position to make the right plays is something that has to go to him a lot. And ultimately, all of that is why the Suns are so good this season. That is why the Suns have improved from last season. They've got Chris Paul, obviously. They have improvement from a lot of their young guys. They have good role players. Monty Williams has been a great coach, and people really know what their point is, what their role is on the team, and they're hungry. They want this. And for all these reasons, this Suns team is not a one-off. Don't think that just because Chris Paul is getting older, that this Suns team is going to fall off after this one season. People have been saying Chris Paul is going to fall off for years, and it just hasn't happened. Vegan Chris Paul is apparently just built different. Even if Chris Paul declines a little bit, with the development that we've seen from Mikal Bridges, Devin Booker, Cameron Johnson, just among other guys, DeAndre Ayton as well, this Suns team is going to continue still being very good because the development of those young players will outweigh Chris Paul's decline, because I expect Chris Paul to keep declining very slowly. That's the way it has been for a very long time. This team's going to continue being good as players keep developing. They're still going to have Monty Williams. They're still going to have a lot of those role players. And as they establish themselves more as a championship threat, they have more potential to bring in big names, bring in guys from the buyout market, bring in potential trade candidates, bring in free agents, all of that stuff. Players are going to want to come to Phoenix because they think they can win a championship. I think the Suns are going to be a powerhouse in the West for multiple coming seasons. And if they showed this much ability to improve over the course of one offseason, imagine when they get another one. So the league should probably be worried because I think the Phoenix Suns are here to stay. I think that they have a legitimate shot to win a NBA championship in the next season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons. They're going to be a mainstay. Don't wait for Phoenix to fall off because they're not going anywhere. So that's all I want to say about the Phoenix Suns. I want to give them a ton of shout outs. I wanted to talk a little bit about what I like so much about this team, why they've been so successful. If you haven't watched the Phoenix Suns, watch the Phoenix Suns. They're really fun to watch play. And yeah, let me know what you think about them. Let me know what you thought about everything I've said in this video. I will see you guys later. Real One, say it back.